You awaken to the sound of bells. Not loud ones, soft, hollow echoes drifting across dew-soaked stone. A pale sun stretches across the monastery walls, lighting up vines that have clung there for centuries. You don't know how you arrived here, but no one seems to mind. So you breathe in and begin to walk the cloisters. Welcome back, my dear wandering soul. Or, if this is your first time here, hello and welcome to the Wandering Storyteller, where history is slow, sleepy, and always told by candlelight. Tonight, I'll be your humble guide as we drift into a quieter time, into a place where the world moved by the tolling of bells and prayers whispered in Latin. This isn't the kind of history they shout about in documentaries. No, this is boring on purpose, the gentle kind of boring. The soft, rhythmic kind that seeps into your thoughts like warm tea into parchment. The kind that doesn't demand your attention, but softly asks if it can sit beside you for a while. Tonight's journey is a special one. We're stepping inside the stone walls of a medieval monastery, a place built not for battles or kings, but for silence, routine, and the sacred art of stillness. A world where time was carved not into hours, but into prayers, where even the dust in the sunlight seemed reverent. You and I will explore it slowly, quietly, room by room, bell by bell. We'll walk past cloisters echoing with footsteps and birdsong, peek into the scriptorium, where monks carefully copy books by hand, and sit silently beside them as they eat their supper in complete silence, the only sound being the words of scripture read aloud. And don't worry, no pop quizzes, no dates to memorize. Just gentle storytelling and the slow unraveling of a world long gone, yet still echoing in stone. So, pull your blanket a little closer. Let your thoughts wander. You are far from the rush of the world now. And remember, there's no need to stay awake for every moment. This monastery doesn't mind if you drift off. The monks will still be here, lighting candles and whispering prayers. So, are you ready? Let's step softly through the doors and begin our night inside a medieval monastery. Let us step through the heavy wooden gate now, slowly, so it doesn't creak too loud, and take our first breath of monastic air. It smells like old stone, damp moss, beeswax, and maybe porridge? Could be yesterday's. The walls rise around us, high and worn, draped in ivy like nature tried to knit them a shawl. This isn't just a building, my friend. This is a world within a world. A self-contained little bubble of prayer, purpose, and pure, uninterrupted stillness. You've arrived at the monastery, not some grand Gothic cathedral with tourists waving selfie sticks, but a quiet, humble little abbey nestled somewhere between the folds of history and your pillow. Let's have a look around, shall we? We'll start in the cloister, the very heart of the monastery. Imagine an open courtyard, framed by covered walkways on all four sides. A square of grass and garden, sometimes with a well or a statue in the center, and paths worn smooth by thousands of quiet feet. This is where the monks walked in silence, reading scripture, or just thinking very deep thoughts. The cloister was kind of like their version of scrolling, except, more spiritual and less doom-laden. Here, everything echoes. The shuffle of sandals, the whisper of robes. Even your thoughts seem to bounce gently off the cold stone columns. It's hard to be stressed in a cloister. The walls themselves seem to ask you to calm down. Let's step into a side room now. It's called the scriptorium, basically the monk office, but instead of typing emails or watching cat videos, they copied books. By hand, with quills, for hours, days, years. You can almost hear the scratching of feather pens across parchment, the occasional frustrated sigh when someone smudged a letter after 40 pages of perfect script. This is where knowledge was saved, when the rest of the world was at war, on fire, or too busy inventing new types of plague. Monks sat here under narrow windows, hunched over illuminated manuscripts, carefully decorating capital letters with gold leaf, dragons, vines, and the occasional grumpy-looking saint. The scriptorium was cold, silent, and dim, but to the monks it was holy work. Each word was a prayer, each line of ink a connection to something greater. Now we enter the chapel. Take a breath. It's even quieter in here. Candles flicker on the altar. Dust dances in the shafts of morning light. There's no furniture really, just long wooden benches, rough stone walls, and the lingering scent of incense. The air feels heavier here, like time moves slower, like the building itself is listening. Monks came here 7 times a day to chant the divine office. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Yes, 8 total if you're counting matins as that groggy 3 a.m. session where they all shuffled in half asleep and still managed to hit perfect harmony. The chanting wasn't for show. It was their way of marking the hours, each psalm, each syllable. Another candle burned closer to the next moment of devotion. The acoustics in here, heavenly, literally. Every chant bounced perfectly off the stone, wrapping around you like a woolen prayer. Shall we step outside again? Into the garden. This wasn't your Pinterest herb spiral with perfect labels and whimsical fairy statues. Nope, this was serious business. Monks grew everything. Sage, thyme, lavender, mint, chamomile. Healing herbs, cooking herbs, and probably a few weeds they hadn't named yet. They used them to treat illnesses, flavor the otherwise bland monastery meals, and occasionally stuff into a sachet to make the dormitories smell less like sweaty wool socks. It was peaceful here. Gardening was considered a holy task, working with the earth, nurturing life, and yes, occasionally yelling at snails. Even monks weren't above a little garden drama. Let's pop into the refectory, the monastery's dining hall. Picture long wooden tables, stone floors, and a general vibe of cafeteria, but make it sacred. Meals were eaten in silence. Complete, utter, not a peep silence. While the monks chewed their bread and cheese, and sometimes, if they were lucky, fish or eggs. One of them would stand at a lectern and read aloud from scripture. So it was less dinner conversation and more holy audiobook. Forks weren't common. Hands and spoons did the job. And if you spilled your porridge, well, you cleaned it up. Quietly, with shame. Holy shame. Last stop for now, the dormitory. A long, echoey room with rows of simple beds. Think hard mattresses, wool blankets, probably a draft or two, and definitely no privacy. Monks slept in their robes, rose before sunrise, and weren't even allowed pillows in some orders. No pillow. That's not sleep, that's medieval character development. There was something called the Great Silence that began at sundown and lasted until morning prayers. No talking, no gestures, just stillness. It was their way of shutting out the world, of letting the mind settle like dust in a sunbeam. So here we are. Within these walls of stone and silence, life was slow, deliberate, and deeply rooted in rhythm. Every space served a purpose. Every footstep echoed with devotion. This wasn't just a building, it was a way of being, a blueprint for a quieter kind of life. And you, lucky traveler, get to wander through it without lifting a finger, or waking up early, or renouncing all earthly goods. Unless you want to, I'm not judging. So let's take one last glance at the ivy-covered walls, the flickering candlelight, and the quiet paths worn by centuries of peaceful footsteps. Then we'll move forward to see how a monk actually lived from hour to hour. Because next, we'll explore the rhythm of their day. One bell ring at a time. Ready to join the monks for morning prayers? Or are your eyes already closing? Either way, the monastery welcomes you. Time in a medieval monastery did not belong to you. There were no clocks, no calendars on the wall with cheeky cat quotes. No Monday meetings, no Tuesday blues, no wild Friday nights. There were only bells, and the bells ruled everything. When they rang, you got up. When they rang again, you prayed. When they rang again, you ate. When they rang again, you stopped what you were doing, turned toward the chapel, and yes, you prayed again. This system, called the Ori Canonici, or canonical hours, was the backbone of monastic life. It was both their schedule and their soundtrack. So let's walk through a monk's day, one holy chime at a time, 2:30 a.m. men's. Because nothing says peace and spiritual clarity like waking up in the middle of the dang night. At 2:30 a.m., long before the rooster had even considered clocking in, the first bell rang. This was matins, the longest and sleepiest of all the prayers. Monks would shuffle out of their dormitories in silence, their breath fogging in the cold air, robes swishing across stone floors. Some probably yawned. Others may have had one eye open and the other still dreaming of porridge. But they came. Always. Matins could last for over an hour. Or two. Or, if it was a special feast day, longer. Yes, you heard right. There were entire nights where monks would spend hours standing, chanting, and reading scripture, like the world's holiest, most low-energy rave. 5 a.m. lauds. As the sun peaked over the hills and the stars tucked themselves away, the bell rang again. Lauds was the dawn prayer, a praise song to welcome the day, even if your eyes were still squinting and your knees were sore from matins. At this point, the monks were basically running on faith and fumes. But the light was returning. Candles were being extinguished. Birds were waking up in the trees outside. It was quiet, but full of promise. After lauds, the monks finally got something magical. A brief nap. Yes, tiny one, like the medieval version of hitting the snooze button on a heavenly schedule. 6 a.m. prime. Then, just when you finally drift off into a dream where you weren't cold or fasting, ding ding, back at it. Prime kicked off the official start of the day. This was when the real work began. After prayers, the monks split off to do their assigned tasks: gardening, manuscript copying, kitchen duties, cleaning, mending, or helping in the infirmary. There were no cell phones, no inboxes, no meetings with Steve from accounting. Just simple, sacred tasks, done with care, done in silence, and somehow, still, the vibes were immaculate. 9 a.m. terse. Mid-morning bell. Another prayer session. You'd pause whatever you were doing, head back to the chapel, and chant with your brothers. It wasn't disruptive, it was grounding, like taking a breath together. A holy coffee break minus the coffee. It reminded the monks that their work wasn't just busy work. It was sacred. Every weed pulled, every spoon washed, every chicken fed. It was all a form of prayer. 12 p.m. sext. Not to be confused with texting your crush, though let's be honest, monks were probably too tired anyway. Sext was the noontime prayer. The sun was high, the stomachs were growling. This prayer hour was usually short and sweet because it was almost lunchtime. And yes, even monks got hungry. 12:30 p.m. midday meal. The refectory was quiet. Not just chill, but vow of silence quiet. Monks would file in, hands folded. They'd sit in long rows. No one spoke. No one slurped. No one passed the salt because, well, salt was expensive and you probably didn't have any anyway. As they ate, usually bread, soup, maybe a little fish, another monk would stand at a lectern and read aloud. Not juicy gossip or fun facts, but scriptures, saint stories, or rules from the Rule of Saint Benedict, the original HR handbook. It was calm, nourishing, purposeful, and when it was over, they cleaned their bowls and slipped back into their work. 3 p.m. None. Not none as in nothing, but none rhymes with tone, as in mid-afternoon prayer. The day was getting long. Muscles were tired. Eyes were drooping, but the bell rang and so they came. None was like a final check-in with God before the sun started to dip. A moment to realign, to recenter, to get through the last stretch of daylight without losing your monkly cool. Now the sun was sinking. Shadows stretched across the cloister. Candles were being relit. Vespers was the evening prayer, calm, reflective, almost melancholy. It was filled with psalms about light fading, about endings, about gratitude for surviving yet another humble, holy day. After Vespers, the monks would have a light supper, sometimes just leftovers, sometimes nothing at all if they were fasting. Then, they'd begin the Great Silence, a full blackout on speaking that lasted until dawn. No chatting, no good night, just silent prayers and soft footsteps echoing through the halls. The final bell. Compline was the bedtime prayer, the spiritual tuck-in. Monks would chant soft hymns, sometimes recite the ancient Salve Regina, and ask for protection through the night. They would extinguish candles, cross themselves, return to their hard wooden beds, wrap themselves in rough woolen blankets, and then sleep until that first bell rang again. One day, one endless, sacred cycle of prayer, work, silence, and service, repeated every day. For a lifetime, monks didn't live by ambition, or drama, were dopamine hits. They lived by the bell, by rhythm, by reverence. Sounds strict, but also kind of beautiful. A life without rush. A world with no noise. A soul with no split attention. It wasn't easy, but for those who chose it, it was enough. So now, dear listener, you've walked the day of a monk. From midnight murmurs to evening stillness. And whether your eyes are wide open or barely hanging on, I hope you felt that slowness seep into your bones. The monastery isn't a place of action. It's a place of presence. And next, we'll enter one of the most magical spaces within these sacred walls. A place of quills, of ink, of dragons drawn into capital letters. Yes, the scriptorium awaits. Welcome to the scriptorium, the quietest room in the quietest place on earth. If the monastery were a symphony of silence, this would be the solo. Here, beneath arched stone ceilings and narrow slits of sunlight, the monks engaged in one of the most patient, painstaking, and strangely soothing labors ever invented, copying books. That's right, before the printing press, before Kindles, before the chaos of comment sections, every single book was copied by hand. Letter by letter. No Control-C, no autocorrect, no grammarly whispering suggestions in the margins. Just quills, ink, parchment, sorbacks, and endless focus. But make no mistake, this wasn't just busy work. It was a spiritual act, a devotion in ink and discipline, a holy labor where every blot was forgiven, and every illuminated dragon was drawn with the patience of a saint. Let's take a look around, shall we? The room smells like parchment, candle wax, and that unique, dusty perfume books give off when they've been sitting for about 600 years. Desks line the walls, slanted wooden writing tables so that the monks didn't hunch too much. Though, let's be honest, they still ended up looking like scholarly shrimp by age 30. Each monk had their setup. A pot of ink, sharpened quills, a knife for scraping mistakes, and maybe a small candle for light. The ink, usually made from oak gall, essentially bug spit and crushed tree parts. Delicious. The parchment, stretched and scraped sheep or goat skin, which meant that before you even got to the writing part, a whole animal had to get involved. Books weren't just rare, they were luxuries, pricier than most people's homes, pricier than some nobles' outfits. That's why the monks took this job so seriously. You didn't want to mess up a page halfway through. That was a fast track to spiritual and emotional breakdown. Now, here's where things get juicy: illuminated manuscripts. You've probably seen them before. Those gorgeous medieval books with swirling golden letters, vines wrapping around the margins, saints with oddly sassy facial expressions, and the occasional totally not biblical dancing rabbit with a sword. These illustrations weren't just for fun, though let's be real, some of those monks had a sense of humor. They were meant to elevate the text, to make it beautiful, reverent, and unforgettable. Imagine spending 2 hours decorating a single capital letter B. Not the whole sentence, not even the word, just the B. Gold leaf would be applied with a tiny brush. Little dragons might be curled into the loops of letters. Some monks even drew entire battle scenes in the margins while the text itself calmly explained. Say, the Book of Psalms. A contradiction? Perhaps, but also kind of iconic. Unlike the chapel, where monks might chant together, the scriptorium was ruled by absolute silence. No chatting, no humming, definitely no dramatic sighs after spilling ink all over page 47. If a monk needed something, he might raise his hand or use a series of quiet gestures, a kind of holy sign language. There were rules for everything. You couldn't just shout, "Brother Cedric, pass me the goat vellum." That would ruin the vibe. Some monasteries even had a designated talker, called a circuitor, who could patrol the scriptorium and gently discipline any monk who got too rowdy, read, breathed too loud. Sounds intense, but the silence was also a gift. In a noisy, chaotic world, this was one place where the only sound was the scratching of quills and the turning of sacred pages. So what exactly were these monks so busy writing? Mostly religious texts, Bibles, psalters, commentaries by church fathers. But some monasteries, especially the bigger, more scholarly ones, also copied works of classical philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and even ancient pagan authors like Aristotle and Plato. In fact, a lot of the ancient world survived because some sleepy-eyed monk thought, hey, this scroll about geometry is pretty cool. I should save it for the squad. Monks weren't just preserving Christian teachings, they were preserving human knowledge. Like a real-life save button for civilization. No monks equals no books. No books equals no Hogwarts. So really, we all owe them big time. So what happened when Brother Leo, after 2 hours of careful calligraphy, accidentally wrote, God is lovey, with an extra E? Well, first came the silent panic. Then the knife. Monks used small knives not just to sharpen their quills, but also to scrape off mistakes from the parchment. If you caught the error early, you could carefully shave down the ink and start again. If you didn't catch it until the next page, well, welcome to the emotional valley of despair. Some monks would leave little passive-aggressive notes in the margins like, here ends the chapter, thanks be to God, or oh my hand, how it aches. Honestly, relatable. Others just kept going. After all, perfection wasn't the goal. Devotion was. The ink might smear, the lines might slant, but every blot was still holy. Let's talk ergonomics, medieval edition. Copying manuscripts all day was not good for the spine. These monks were seated on wooden benches, no padding of course, at sloped desks, hunched over their work for hours at a time. Backaches? Constant. Eye strain? Absolutely. Carpal tunnel? Probably named after one of them. And yet, they carried on. Quill in hand, posture ruined, but spiritually rich. Some orders allowed breaks for stretching. Others, not so much. Your reward was the slow march toward spiritual enlightenment and maybe a really cool capital letter G. But the weirdest part? They loved it. They truly believed that every line they copied was a form of worship. And maybe, just maybe, that aching hand brought them a little closer to God. Now, if you're thinking all these monks were serious all the time, think again. Let's talk marginalia, the doodles and drawings left in the margins of manuscripts. Some were spiritual, angels, saints, or animals with halos. Some were not. Snails jousting with knights, weird cats playing bagpipes, bunnies committing tax fraud. Okay, maybe not that last one, but close. Marginalia was where monks let their imaginations run wild. Maybe they were bored. Maybe they were sneaking a joke past the abbot. Maybe they were just having a weird day. Either way, those margins gave us a glimpse into the human side of monastic life. The part that still laughed, even in silence. The part that wanted to draw a unicorn in the middle of a serious theological debate. So what was a typical day like? Wake up before dawn. Pray. Head to the scriptorium. Right. Pause for terce. Mid-morning prayer. Right. Maybe copy 1 page. Maybe 2. If you were fast, maybe even 3. Then sext. Then dinner. Then more writing. More scraping. More aching hands. Some monks had to illuminate pages as well. That meant gold leaf, color, and a lot of precision. It could take months to finish one book. And at the end of the day, you'd close your ink pot, blow out your candle, whisper a prayer over your work, and hope you didn't misspell something on the very last line. Many of these books still exist. They're in museums, libraries, universities, preserved under glass with climate control and security systems that would make the monks laugh or cry. These weren't just books. They were time capsules, preserved pieces of devotion, of silence, of human patience in its purest form. Some bear the names of their creators. Others are anonymous, but each one carries the soul of its scribe in every letter, swirl, and smudge. So the next time you tap your screen to flip a page or sigh at a typo in your ebook, remember, someone once spent a year of their life copying just one. And now we leave the scriptorium, quietly, respectfully, with great appreciation for the monks who made the medieval world readable. Up next, we step into a humbler but equally sacred part of monastic life, where food was scarce, forks were optional, and nobody said a word. Yes, it's time for meals, fasting, and the great silence. Welcome to the monastery's most sacred, most anticipated, and arguably most mysterious space, the refectory, or as we might call it today, the dining room. But don't be fooled. This isn't your average mealtime hangout. There are no food fights here. No monk accidentally spilling soup while laughing at a joke. No debates over who gets the last chunk of barley bread. Why? Because no one speaks. That's right. Welcome to a world where every bite is silent, every sip is reverent, and even the peas know better than to roll across the table. First things first, what did monks actually eat? Forget five-course feasts or TikTok cooking trends. Monastic cuisine was the original bland is better. Their daily meals were simple, humble, and entirely free from garlic, onions, drama, or joy, depending on your perspective. Let's look at the greatest hits of the monastic menu. Bread, the staple of life. Hard, crusty, sometimes lovingly baked, sometimes not. Vegetable soup, thin, earthy, and occasionally featuring something green and mysterious. Legumes, lentils, peas, beans, aka the holy trinity of fiber. Cheese, when the cow was in a good mood and the cellar hadn't flooded. Fish allowed on non-fasting days, usually salted, always slightly suspicious. Ale or watered wine hydration, medieval style. Meat, almost never. The rule of Saint Benedict prohibited the flesh of four-legged animals. So unless you were sick, dying, or in the infirmary, that roast beef fantasy stayed a fantasy. But here's the thing, they weren't in it for the flavor. Meals weren't about indulgence. They were about nourishment, gratitude, and, you guessed it, silence. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Or rather, the complete lack of any noise at all. Every monastery observed some form of the Great Silence. A period usually beginning after evening prayers, vespers, and lasting until morning, where no one was allowed to speak. At all. For any reason. But in the refectory, that silence often applied every single meal. Picture it. Long wooden tables, stone walls echoing with the faint clink of spoons against bowls, and rows of monks chewing with the elegance and stealth of trained ninjas. It wasn't awkward. It was holy. Mealtime was a moment to reflect, to be grateful, to chew slowly, to not ask Brother Matthew if he could pass the salt because there was no salt and also no talking aloud. Some monasteries had rules like no looking around too much, lest your eyes wander in temptation. No gesturing, unless very necessary. No complaining about cold soup, even when it was literally iceberg lettuce water. Wait, you might say, was it completely silent? Well, mostly, but there was one voice permitted during meals. The voice of the reader. Each meal, a monk would stand at a special pulpit, usually near the center of the refectory, and read aloud from a sacred or instructive text. That's right, mealtime was basically a one-man audiobook performance, complete with zero audience participation and absolutely no applause. The readings could be passages from the Bible, lives of the saints, usually featuring dramatic martyrdom, writings of church fathers, a chapter from the Rule of Saint Benedict, occasionally moral lessons or stories to encourage humility. Imagine trying to enjoy your third lentil of the day while listening to the tale of a 3rd century hermit who lived on top of a column for 30 years. Inspiring? Yes. Appetizing? Not so much. But for the monks, it was a moment of spiritual feeding alongside physical nourishment. Their ears took in wisdom while their mouths chewed quietly and thoughtfully. Now let's talk fasting. Monks didn't just eat modestly, they frequently chose to not eat at all. Fasting was seen as a way to purify the body, sharpen the soul, and, well, suffer a little bit for good measure. There were entire seasons when food was extra restricted, especially during Advent, leading up to Christmas, Lent, leading up to Easter, various feast days, saints' days, Wednesdays, Fridays, and occasionally, just because, during fasts, meals were reduced or eliminated. Breakfast was skipped. Supper might be little more than soup. On strict days, just bread and water. On very strict days, just water. And even that came with a side of guilt. But again, this wasn't punishment. This was purpose. Hunger reminded monks that life was temporary. The body was weak, and only the soul endured. That said, I wouldn't recommend visiting a monastery in the middle of Lent if you're a fan of brunch. So who made the food? Enter the monastic kitchen, a sacred blend of chaos and contemplation. The monk in charge of the kitchen was often chosen not for his culinary genius, but for his humility and obedience. He wasn't called Chef Gregory with a white hat and a ladle. He was the refectorian, and he took his duties very seriously. Kitchen tasks included tending the fire, baking the bread, stirring endless pots of soup, keeping food from spoiling hard without a fridge, serving the meals in silence, and cleaning everything afterward. The work was hot, smoky, and often thankless, but it was holy. Cooking was considered an act of service, a way to care for the brethren, to fuel prayer, and to turn physical labor into devotion. Also, if the bread turned out great, you could bet the refectorian said an extra prayer of gratitude. Believe it or not, monks did sometimes eat well. On high feast days, like Easter or Christmas, monasteries might break out a fancier spread: freshly baked sweet bread, better cheese, fresh herbs, maybe even dessert, fruit, nuts, honey. It wasn't Michelin star, but it was enough to make a monk go, "Ah yes, truly this is a feast of heavenly delights." Feast days reminded them that joy, too, was part of holiness. Even in a life of fasting, moments of celebration were sacred. Joy, just like silence, had a place at the table. Once the last bowl was scraped, the reader closed his book, and the monks rose from the table. The great silence began. From sundown until dawn, not a word was to be spoken. No jokes, no gossip, no whispered prayers. Just the quiet creak of wood, the rustle of robes, the distant bell marking the night hours. If you needed something, anything, you found another way. A glance, a gesture, or you simply waited. The point wasn't communication. The point was stillness. This silence was considered healing. It gave space for prayer, reflection, and rest. It wasn't awkward, it was intentional. Imagine going an entire night without checking your phone, answering a text, or even muttering, "Oops," when you drop your sandal. That's monk mode. To us modern mortals, monastic meals might sound grim, but for the monks, food wasn't about indulgence. It was a ritual, a way to align the body with the soul, a daily reminder that even eating could be done in the name of humility and grace. Every lentil was a prayer, every crust of bread, a lesson in gratitude, every empty stomach, a doorway to discipline. And honestly, there's something kind of beautiful about it. So tonight, as you cozy up under your blanket, think of the refectory's flickering candles, the quiet clink of wooden spoons, the long shadows stretching across stone walls as silence settles in. No rush, no chatter, just monks and their soup, finding holiness in the hush. Next, we'll wander into the monastery garden, where healing herbs, secret remedies, and ancient soil tell their own sleepy stories. Until then, eat slowly, chew mindfully, and maybe light a candle for your next snack. Tucked behind stone walls, kissed by sun and shadow, buzzing gently with bees and busy fingers, lies the monastic garden. It may not look like much, just a patch of soil, some wooden beds, and a very judgmental cat lounging near the rosemary. But this was a place of life, healing, and deeply rooted peace. This is where monks connected to the earth, where they grew their food, gathered their medicine, and whispered quiet prayers over rows of thyme and chamomile. Come, walk with me. Let's slow our steps, breathe in the sage, listen to the rustle of leaves, and explore the herbal heart of medieval monastic life. This wasn't your decorative, Instagrammable garden with fairy lights and an herb sign shaped like a chicken. No, this was serious business. The monastic garden had 3 sacred purposes: to feed the community, to heal the sick, to meditate in silence and service. The monks believed that gardening wasn't just physical labor, it was a form of worship. Every seed planted, every weed pulled, every watering done with intention was a prayer. It was hard work, but in the monastery all work was holy, even sweating under the sun with dirt under your fingernails. Much like their daily routines, monastic gardens were laid out with a sense of order and rhythm. There were usually 4 main sections: the herb garden, Hortus Medicus, for healing and medicine; the vegetable garden, to feed the brothers; the orchard or vineyard for fruit, shade, and the occasional miracle grape. The cloister garden, a quiet, often enclosed space with flowers or symbolic plants, meant for meditation and prayer. Paths were straight, beds were neat, and labels? Maybe written on wax tablets or simply remembered by Brother Oswin, who definitely knew the difference between whorehound and hyssop. Thank you very much. Let's get to the good stuff, the herbs. Monks weren't just gardeners, they were herbalists, the original apothecaries. They didn't have Tylenol or antibiotics, but they did have centuries of plant knowledge, passed down in whispered Latin and carefully copied manuscripts. Some favorites included chamomile to calm the nerves and ease sleep, lavender for burns, bites, and bad moods, mint for stomach aches and general sassiness, sage for sore throats and spiritual cleansing, valerian, nature's medieval melatonin, yarrow to stop bleeding or ward off evil depending on the day, hyssop for coughs, colds, and dramatic biblical vibes. These herbs would be dried, steeped, ground, or mixed into salves and tonics. The monks tended them daily, sometimes speaking prayers as they worked, believing the healing power came not just from the plant, but from the love and care put into it. You've seen the gardens, walked the cloisters, listened to the silence between spoonfuls of barley soup, and even sat beside the weary scribes of the scriptorium. But now, dear listener, we arrive at the soul of it all, the invisible thread that held monastic life together. The vows, the values, the quiet beliefs that shaped every step, every word or lack thereof, and every breath of a monk's day. This section doesn't take place in any one room. It's not housed in the refectory, the dormitory, or even the chapel. It's everywhere. It's how they walked, how they spoke, how they didn't speak. Let's explore the sacred commitments that defined a monk's existence. Every monk, upon joining a monastic order, made a solemn promise, a trio of vows that acted as a spiritual anchor. These weren't temporary. They were forever, like marriage vows, but with fewer arguments and more Latin. Let's meet the holy trinity of commitment. 1. Poverty. This vow meant giving up personal ownership. No money, no land, no this is mine energy whatsoever. Everything a monk had, his robe, his bowl, his straw mattress, belonged to the community. Even the books they lovingly copied weren't theirs. They were for all. It was about humility, about releasing the ego, about realizing that happiness wasn't in possessions, but in peace. Imagine living your whole life without a wallet, without a wish list, without Amazon Prime. To the monks, poverty wasn't punishment. It was freedom. One less thing to chase, one less thing to lose. Not just physical celibacy, but a deeper devotion of the heart. Chastity meant giving up romantic and sexual relationships, not because love was bad, but because monks were married to something else entirely, God. Their love was directed upward, inward, and outward to all equally. No crushes, no date nights, no awkward monastery dances. Chastity created emotional stillness. It was about focusing all one's passion and energy into prayer, service, and the quiet work of the soul. Was it lonely? Maybe, but it was also spacious. Why, a love not narrowed by preference, but expanded through devotion. Perhaps the hardest vow of all. Obedience meant surrendering your will, not blindly, but faithfully. Monks obeyed the rule of their order, the guidance of their abbot, and ultimately the divine. If Brother Alric was told to clean the latrines for the next 3 weeks, he did it, without complaint, probably while whispering Psalm 23 under his breath. Obedience was about trust, about letting go of control, about embracing structure not as restriction, but as a path to clarity. It sounds rigid, but in a world full of chaos, this kind of obedience could actually feel peaceful. Imagine it's evening. You're a weary traveler, cloaked in dust and mud from the long road, your feet aching, your stomach unsure of the last thing it ate. The sky is dimming, the air is cold, and you don't know what village lies ahead. But then, through the trees you spot a stone building, its windows aglow with candlelight. A monastery. You approach quietly, and before you even knock, a monk is already opening the gate. He smiles. He He says nothing, but he gestures you inside. Because in this sacred space, hospitality isn't a favor. It's a vow. Every monastery had one, the guest house. Sometimes it was a cozy chamber tucked beside the cloister. Other times it was a standalone building near the entrance. But no matter the size or style, its purpose was the same: to welcome the stranger, to shelter the lost, to feed the hungry, warm the cold, and provide a little sliver of peace to anyone who knocked. Travelers, pilgrims, the sick, the curious. Even nobles in disguise and wandering musicians sometimes found refuge there. No one was turned away, because to the monks, every visitor was a reflection of Christ. There were no forms to fill out, no ID checks, no, "What brings you to our stone sanctuary tonight?" Just bread, a little soup, maybe a spare wool blanket and a straw bed in the guest quarters. If you were wounded, they would care for you. If you were cold, they'd offer the warmest spot by the fire. If you hadn't eaten in days, they'd serve you before serving themselves. Hospitality wasn't a performance. It was a sacrament, a holy act, wrapped in quiet service. Most guest encounters happened in near silence. Monks took the vow of hospitality seriously, but they didn't chatter about it. You might be greeted with a nod, handed a bowl, shown to your bed, and left in peace. There was reverence in that stillness, a sacred welcome that spoke louder than any words. Guests were sometimes invited to join in prayers or to sit in the chapel and listen. But there was never pressure, never judgment. The monastery didn't ask you to become someone else. It simply let you rest as you were. Medieval stories are full of mystical visitors arriving at monasteries. There's the tale of a wandering beggar who turned out to be an angel, or the anonymous stranger who blessed the monastery's well, which never dried again, or the musician who stayed a night, played a song, and left behind a relic that cured the sick. Maybe those were myths, maybe they were real, but to the monks, everyone had the potential to be a vessel of the divine. That's why even the smelliest traveler, the shyest orphan, or the rudest knight was still shown kindness. Not because they deserved it, but because that's what love looks like. Of course, this constant welcoming came with its challenges. Monks valued silence and solitude, and a guest could throw off the rhythm. Meals had to be adjusted, schedules bent, chores shuffled, but they did it anyway, because they believed sacrifice was sacred. Giving up a little peace to offer someone rest, that was holy, that was monastic, that was love in action. When a guest left the monastery, they were often blessed at the gate. A short prayer, a bow, sometimes a small token, a crust of bread, a sprig of rosemary, or a piece of parchment with a verse written in careful ink. And then they were gone, footsteps fading down the path. But for a moment, they were part of something ancient, a story older than roads, a kindness that never needed to be loud. If you've ever felt lost, if you've ever wandered without knowing where you were headed, if your soul's boots are muddy and your heart just needs a bed and a bowl of soup, know this: the monastery would have let you in. No questions, no sermons, just a nod, a door opened, and a warm fire waiting. Because some buildings don't just hold history, they hold humanity, and the guest house was one of them. Next, as night deepens and candles burn low, we'll return to the dormitories, where monks laid their heads under stone ceilings and dreamed silent dreams until the morning bell. As the last echoes of the bell faded into the twilight, the monastery slipped into its quietest, holiest hour. The great silence had begun. This was not just bedtime. This was a ritual, a descent into stillness, a return to the self, and maybe, just maybe, a glimpse of the divine, waiting in the shadows between dreams. Let's walk softly now, through darkened hallways and whispering cloisters, to witness what it meant to sleep like a monk. Before any monk laid his head to rest, he attended Compline, the final prayer of the day. The chapel was dim, lit only by candlelight. Shadows flickered across stone walls as voices rose in slow, measured chant. The prayers were gentle, reflective, psalms of protection, of gratitude, of letting go, a spiritual lullaby for tired hearts. Into your hands, "O Lord, I commend my spirit." It was less about sleep and more about surrender. Not just of the day, but of control, of ego, of fear. And when the last note of chant dissolved into silence, the monks turned and walked single file into the night. The dormitory was simple, a long, echoey room lined with beds or pallets, some made of straw, others thin mattresses on wooden planks. No curtains, no pillows, no privacy, just a shared space of quiet surrender. Each monk slept in his habit. Those long robes came in handy. The idea wasn't comfort, it was readiness. If the bell rang at 2 a.m. for matins, you'd better be up and chanting within minutes. There were no night lights, just a few candles flickering as each brother whispered a final prayer and slipped under his blanket. No one talked. No one tossed and turned, loudly, anyway. They simply let go. You might think monastic sleep was strict and joyless, but it had its quiet magic. Imagine drifting off with the scent of beeswax and old books in the air, the distant memory of chanting still humming in your chest, the feel of cool stone walls holding the night outside. It was a sleep without screens, without noise, without to-do list scrolling behind your eyelids. Just breath, just silence, just the echo of a life lived in rhythm. Even sleep was sacred, even rest had structure, and in that stillness, monks found what many of us still search for: peace. Around 2 or 3 a.m., the bell rang again. Matins, the night office. Eyes opened, blankets were folded, sandals were slid on, and the monks returned to the chapel by moonlight and candle. Some barely awake, some already reciting psalms in their heads, but all present, all devoted. They chanted, they read, they offered the first hours of the day, not to coffee or chaos, but to silence, scripture, and surrender. And then, if time allowed, they returned to their beds for a brief nap before the sun. A sacred snooze, a holy half-sleep. Night in the monastery wasn't just the end of the day. It was a mirror, a soft veil between the known and the unknown, a moment to step outside time. As you lie here now, wrapped in your own blanket, listening to your own breath, you're not so far from those stone walls, that flickering candle, that monk folding his hands in the dark and murmuring a prayer into the hush. You don't have to be in a monastery to touch that stillness. It's always here, waiting. We've wandered far, haven't we? From the quiet waking hours of matins to the stillness of sleep beneath stone arches. From parchment-stained fingertips in the scriptorium to the fragrant stillness of the herb garden. We've tasted lentil stew in silence, listened to psalms by candlelight, and walked with monks whose every step was a prayer. But now it's time to leave the monastery. Not in haste, not with noise, but with reverence. Let's take one last walk beneath the cloister arches, the shaded walkway that loops endlessly, gently, like time itself. Let's pause, breathe, and gather what we found. Monks didn't live to be impressive. They didn't strive to be remembered. They didn't seek adventure or applause or a great story to tell at the end of the day. They lived simply, quietly, devotedly. They understood that peace isn't a prize. It's a practice. That joy doesn't have to shout. That even in a world of war, chaos, and constant change, there can be one place, within stone walls or within your chest, where silence is sacred and the soul is safe. In a time where the world rushed forward, kings fighting wars, cities rising and falling, the monastery stayed still. Its bells didn't ring louder, only longer. Its halls weren't filled with shouts, but with steady, sacred silence. The monks believed that slowness is strength, that what's quiet is often what lasts, that tending to one small task with care, a candle lit, a bed made, a page copied, was more holy than chasing 1,000 unfinished dreams. Maybe we need that reminder too. So now, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts begin to wander, know this: you are safe, you are loved, you have walked through sacred time. The monastery asks nothing of you. It simply offers rest. Let the bells fade. Let the cloisters darken. Let the candles burn low. And when you close your eyes, imagine the hush of the chapel, the warmth of the fire, the soft rustle of robes, the silence that holds you like a blanket. You're not just falling asleep, you're entering peace. Sleep well, wanderer, until next time, and may your dreams be written in golden ink